Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Welcome back to the Corner of Truth and Courage. You're listening to Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. On Fridays, we usually take a little bit of time to look at news that's going on around the world, dealing with Islam in Christian nations. And you know your country is in trouble when you start hearing Muslims on your streets, like they just did in Sydney, Australia yesterday, chant what's known as the Khaybar chant. Here's how it goes. Sounds something like this. Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad, Sahuf Ayahud. So what are they saying? Well, in English, it's simply this, Khaybar, Khaybar. They're naming a city, a town in ancient Arabia where Muhammad took his army. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But they're saying, Khaybar, Khaybar, O Jews, the army of Muhammad will return. This is the call of the jihadis. Now, one main thing you often hear Muslims say, Allah Akbar, meaning that Allah is the greatest. God, Allah, is the greatest, the greatest. And it's kind of an incantation. Muslims will repeat it oftentimes when they are going through some kind of stressful moment, or they are trying to perform something like a jihad for Muhammad. It's almost like a magical word to them. And the more they say it, the closer they become to Allah. But when they're chanting Khaybar, Khaybar, and oftentimes they'll just use the short version of that, it was first popularized in the 1980s by Ahmed Yassin, who's the founder of Hamas. When the Bali bomber, who killed 88 Australians on the island out there in Indonesia, Amrozi, when he was being sentenced to death for his crimes, he chanted that. Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yahad, in the courtroom. Jaish Muhammad, Safu Yahud. O Jews, Khaybar, Khaybar, O Jews, the army of Muhammad will return. The second leader of Al-Qaeda wrote a book in 2009 with that slogan as its title. And it's become so well used by the jihadi Muslims that in Europe you can now face jail time for hate speech. Some in Belgium were charged with inciting terror in the country of Belgium back in 2017. And in 2021, the British actually were going to charge a couple of Muslims in London for yelling that in their streets, but never were prosecuted. So what we're seeing now recently with the uprise of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiments being chanted in our streets, this slogan has reappeared recently in England, in Sweden, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, and, of course, Australia, as we just talked about. But also we heard it on the streets of New York City just last month. So if you ever hear this, you ever hear Muslims crying that out, do us a favor here at Fortress of Faith. Video it. Capture the faces of those that are doing it. Countries that have hate crimes like Canada, England, and many places in Europe now where the freedom of speech is limited, these people should be prosecuted for the crime of inciting. They're calling and inciting people to rise up against non-Muslims, primarily Jews. So let's get into this Khaybar. What happened there? Well, Khaybar was the home of the Banu Nadir tribe. They were Jews. And And Khaybar is an oasis city north of Medina. And Muhammad was coming for them. And so the Jews mustered up an army of 2,000 men, 300 horses to defend themselves against Muhammad's 10,000 men and horses that were coming to destroy them. Well, of course, victory was given to the Muslims that day, and those who remained had to negotiate, the Jews that remained had to negotiate some kind of settlement. And as part of an agreement, the Jews of Khaybar surrendered all their wealth that day, and some of the Jews approached Muhammad with a request to continue to cultivate their orchards and remain in the oasis. And in return, 1/2 of what they produced they would give to the Muslims. Now, this became an important precedent in Islamic law, in Sharia, for demitude. If Muslims get what's called the upper hand, in other words, they now reign, you don't necessarily have to die as a non-Muslim. They will allow you to live if you agree to demitude. Now, it's not technically slavery, but it's close to it. And a demi is someone who agrees as a non-Muslim to pay the non-Muslim tax, the demi tax. And to do that, because of what happened here, that was what was required of you. Half of what you own and half of what you earn now becomes the property of the Muslims if you're a demi. But you can live, and you don't have to convert to Islam or die. And so many Christians, this is what we saw in the Pact of Umar when the second caliph of Islam led their armies into the Christian area of Syria. That was a very Christian nation at that time in the 7th century. And they went to Damascus and they sacked that city and the Christians. And the Pact of Umar was signed by the remaining Christians to live as demis, but not be Muslim. And they had to pay 50% of what they owned and 50% of what they earned in order to stay alive. But when Muhammad would sack a city, this is what happened up there in Khaybar, the Jewish tribe of the Banu Nadir tribe. There were 88 campaigns in the Quran, in the stories of Muhammad that he led in 88 campaigns, all but 2, he is the aggressor. And this is one of the times that he's the aggressor. Now, if they, sacked and destroyed a village or people, there was the Khums tax. Muhammad required 20% of the war booty to be paid to him. And there's a story of this girl named Safiya. Safiya survived that war there in Khaybar, and she was the wife of the Banu Nadir tribe, the treasurer of the tribe, but she was also the daughter of the chief, of the ruler of the city. And she was renowned for her beauty, 17 years of age. And the companions of Muhammad told Muhammad about this beauty of the slaves that were captured. But one of her own men, Dia Kalbi, already claimed her to be his. So Muhammad, called him to meet with him and to bring the girl Safiya, and she was certainly a beauty. And so Muhammad required that he take her because he gets first pick. And so he traded her 7 other slave girls from the Khaybar to be his so that he could take Safiya. And he took her to his bed that night, the same night that her father and her husband was slaughtered. Later, he manumitted her, released her from slavery, and made her one of his wives. And so she became one of 2 Jewish wives that Muhammad kept. We knew he had at least 18 up to 22 different wives and thousands of sex slaves that he had, concubines. The second of the Jewish wives, her name was Rahana, and she became one of his at the Battle of the Ditch, the Battle of Medina. And this is one of the rare occasions when the Arabs and others rose up against Muhammad and came after him. And he won the day there, the Battle of the Ditch. But the Banu Qurayza tribe, which was to the east of him, he laid siege to them just after that, because the angel Gabriel told him that they were in league against him. They were supposed to be fighting with him. And so he laid siege to them. And this is the last of the Jewish tribes that was remaining. And so he now makes war with them. They come to an agreement that they could all leave, but they have to leave Arabia. And they come out. Muhammad then tells his people war is deceit. And he chopped off the heads of 700 to 900 of the men and took the women and children as war booty. Rahana was one of them, another, I guess, a beauty. And she was manumitted and made free of her slavery. And Muhammad married her. And she's the one who actually poisons the prophet. And he dies later of the poisoning. So Rahana, the second of the Jewish wives there, became the one who actually killed the prophet. This is why the Jews are called the prophet killers, because they killed the prophet Muhammad. So the term Khaybar is the idea of the Muslims destroying and sacking the Jews, taking control of them and bringing them into either death or subjugation. So if you ever hear that term, Khaybar, Ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad, Safu Yahud, this is a call to subjugate the Jews, destroy the Jews. And we need to be aware of that. And if you ever hear that being chanted in your community, your country is in trouble. And we need to stand up to it. We need to have the courage to say no. We don't allow that here. And take whatever precautions legally you can to get it to stop in your nation. Well, folks, that's going to be it for today and the week. I hope you'll join us again next week at the Corner of Truth and Courage. Now go out and be salt and light. Have you ever thought of what a $10 donation could do to help your community? $10 donation could sponsor one meal at a homeless shelter, could buy a bag of pet food or treats for an animal shelter, or could help a small business by buying a handmade craft item. Or a $10 donation could help your community find guidance rooted in biblical principles by supporting Fortress of Faith. Here at Fortress of Faith, where we meet at the corner of truth and courage, we tackle tough topics, answer the most challenging questions, and equip communities with tools to navigate modern life faithfully and confidently. Help your fellow man and support Fortress of Faith today with a $10 tax-deductible monthly gift by calling 800-616-0082. Again, that's 800-616-0082.